All right, Jeremy. So I think we've established that you have some fairly, shall we say, strong opinions about some of the negatives about Ivy.
Mhm.
One thing that I'm curious about is surely there were positives, right? And
Yeah, 100%.
actually, why don't we put some balance to this? How do you feel about your experience at Ivy? Positive, negatives? Would you do it again? And
Yeah.
if you could do it again, is there anything that you would change?
Yeah, totally. So like in fairness, it's not all negative. It's mostly negative. But I I would say that yeah, like there are people in my section who have become lifelong friends, which is the whole, as advertised, great. If I could do it again, I probably would, but I would do it again in the sense of like if I could take myself now, knowing what I know, having gone through it once, if I could do it again, I would go in with very much just the knowing what the reality of it is. The reality of Ivy is like, does it give you a leg up? Look, 10 years ago, Ivy probably let you skip 2 to 3 rungs that were like, there's like the true entry level. And it's like, oh, we went to Ivy, maybe we can start him up here. Like, I think it did carry an advantage 10 years ago. Is that the case now? Maybe not, especially if AI is eliminating, sadly, a lot of those entry level moves. But I would do it again. The good of it is like, hey, you are going to meet your people in your section. Hopefully, those people are good people. And our section actually, like, yeah, they were. That was great. Meeting great professors like yourself, Jana. Um, yeah, there's many others. But it's tough to, we talked about this a little bit offline about a begrudging admission that like, yes, it was good. I'll begrudgingly say like, yeah, it was good. Um, could this experience have been? Could I have learned the same things without the suffering? 100%, dude. Yeah, and I'd probably encourage anyone else like if you outside of maybe it still has this need for it, like consulting or investment banking, you probably still have to go there. If you're in Canada, that's your shot. That's your in. But if you want to learn anything else, I'd probably urge you to seek out other avenues um, because the expectation differs significantly from the reality. So probably that's my, if I was trying to be balanced, that's what I would give as my balance take for Ivy.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, there's a deeper question of, what's a fair expectation of an undergraduate business education, right? And, is it fair to expect a place, for example, like Ivy or any other school, to deliver more than what it's doing, or to do it in a different way, which is what we're talking about, really, right? You're
Yeah.
acknowledging that there are definitely some positives, um, but also some pretty significant kind
Yeah.
of kind of issues there, right? On the culture and the value side, and kind of
Mm.
how that works. And your argument is unnecessarily so, right? Like
Yeah.
not
Can we teach Porter's five forces without doing lifelong harm? I would take the brave take that maybe, just maybe.
okay. I didn't realize I was doing that when I taught it, but
No,
anyway,
no, no.
I
You didn't. I don't even. Frankly, I keep mentioning Porter's Five Forces as like meme of something that is not relevant anymore. Maybe Porter. Maybe that's being unfair to him. I think Porter's Five Forces was like or part of Strat class, which was an HBA one thing, I
yep.
believe. So and actually, yeah. So my strategy prof was great actually, but I would say like, can we teach people about like cost accounting and doing differentials without making them think that it's like the be all and end all of everything that we're like, it goes back to fulfillment and achievement and like, dude, how much does this matter? Like it served the school and probably rightfully so well to say like, well, at this point in your life, like knowing how to do a discounted a cash flow statement is like the most important thing to you. I'm like, great, man. But like, do we need to chip away at people's senses of self-worth and so on to teach them finance stuff that they probably won't even use? Some of them might. Like going back to the example of the 48, it's like, hey, some people that could be their whole first year out of school. Do we need to, does it need to go this deep for it to work? You know?
Yeah, and that's an interesting question. There would be people, I think, particularly those who have gone through it, who would say yes, right? Because they're the selected sample of people who liked it and maybe sort of saw it as part of the broader experience.
Yeah.
But they are the selected sample, right? Like the
Yeah.
people who would disagree aren't going to be the people that are going to show up and advocate, obviously, for that. So,
Mhm.
yeah, I think it's a really interesting question. I think it's a very common complaint. You know, it's not Ivy specific, right? Any very competitive
Yeah.
business
Yeah.
school, they all run on a very similar, for lack of a better word, business model, right? Of how it works.
Yeah.
And their performance metrics have nothing to do with fulfillment. They're based on the
Mhm.
assumption of a high starting salary, as you point out, is your fulfillment, right? That's
There you
that's
go. Yeah.
effectively what the prevailing assumption is, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
Like, why wouldn't you be happy, right? When we're
Mhm.
using this as the performance metric, and parents can buy that one, right? Because it's measurable, it pays for the education, it's got
Yeah.
ROI all over it, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So there's a number of reasons why that's what wins here, right?
Sure.
But I think we're both on the same page that, you know, I certainly came to this conclusion why I wrote the book, right? After a while, you see this happen enough years over and over again, you really start to wonder whether we're maximizing the right metric, right?
Yeah. Absolutely.
And whether even deeper than that, whether the preparation for the broader kind of career life, quality of
Mhm.
life, let's talk about it more broadly, whether we're even really doing that beyond the most rudimentary level, right? So you're not
Mhm.
going to starve, right? We can accomplish that. But then it's not clear after that kind of how far it goes, right? Like
It's murky. After the first
yeah,
step on the hierarchy of needs, it gets a little harder. Yeah.
yeah, right. It's a little bit, you know, like, are we pushing too hard down that one road and telling you to ignore others that actually would matter? And I'd say for sure, right?
Mhm.
If that's road. Now that still might fit a certain number of the students just fine, but I don't know that that's broadly speaking, if we were talking about education, if you're talking about the last stop, you know, before the train heads out, whether that would be
Yeah.
ideally how you'd want to do it, right?
Yeah, and I think the metaphor of a train is interesting because it's going to go where tracks are laid. And I think that one of the things that is very poor, it's an expectation that Ivy sets, and maybe that all schools set, but it's just this overemphasis on your first job. And it's like, because it's their metric too. It's like your first job salary. But like I started in marketing, and like I would say the most interesting people, which I would maybe not even class myself in as a category, but it's like they start somewhere and they go in a wholly different direction because they can take what they learn from one place and apply it to another. Like the founder of Ruby on Rails, who works at like who founded one of the world's leading productivity software companies, used to be like an F1 racing driver. That's insane. Like, how did you hit all three of those, dude? That's wild. But I don't know. I actually don't know that I would like the guy, but probably super interesting to talk to. So the idea that Ivy kind of promotes, or maybe all business schools promote, of like, you start in marketing, you're going to die in marketing, or you're going to retire in marketing, or consulting, or investment banking, is deeply untrue. Like, I think, but to your point, because the next thought was like, well, what should they be encouraging or incentivizing? And it's like optionality immediately came to mind. Well, probably not, because that has the same outcomes. People go into investment banking because of the exit opportunities, but does would it be good if everyone went into investment banking? Absolutely. Do we need more people going into investment banking? I would say no. So how do we how do we promote or encourage maximizing your optionality if not by going to the careers that have the best exit options? Um, I don't know, because you go to consult, if you go through any career path, maybe it's not about career, maybe it's about the skill set that you build. And then Ivy probably would say, well, that's what we're trying to freaking do here, man. Like that's why you take accounting and finance and leadership and strat and whatever, whatever, whatever. We make you do those so that you know a little bit about it. So,
Yeah, I think so. This is a really interesting question, right? And
mm,
so when I wrote my book, it was actually a bet on a particular thesis that I will say on a micro level I've seen is proven, but societally unproven because our society has never actually tried this before, or any other society that I'm aware of.
yeah, yeah,
Meaning, what if you actually redid education based upon the principles of helping every individual find what lines up best with them
mhm,
and helping them actually get there,
yeah,
right? As opposed to kind of fashioning them like a factory or like assembly
yes,
line and making them a product that somebody on the outside who's already established wants.
mhm,
Right.
mhm,
And of course, the answer needs to be something in practice, probably in the middle if you're running a huge kind of system.
mhm,
But we're essentially the second and we're not at all the first for the most part,
yeah,
right?
yeah,
Business school is certainly more extreme than the rest of the university. There are probably other people who have gone to small liberal arts colleges that say, well, every professor asked me what I wanted to do. And this is, they don't end up on my podcast, right? Because
yeah, exactly.
we're doing B school. So it's a completely different environment. So I, my hypothesis is that, going back to your quote about the job satisfaction stats about how most people just are kind of meh, right, about their jobs.
Yeah.
They're not into them. This is what we think of as normal. And in some particular high paying jobs, this is what the compensation is for, right? Precisely
Mhm.
because,
That's what the money's for. Yeah.
yeah, because without the money, no one would actually want to do it. So the the interesting question is, well, what if you redid it and what would people go off and do, right? And I think what I've seen on a real micro level with individual students who have veered off, shall we say, right? The equivalent
Mhm.
of, in your case, the HBA2 who I talked to who would really be at a crossroads and feel tremendous pressure to stay on track,
Yeah.
but then really feel like that this was not going to be the right road to go and then had the choice to deviate. The ones that deviated, I can say now with enough years, they've turned out better for sure, right? And
Yeah.
so what evidence I do see suggests that we probably should be at least opening that door as opposed to keeping
Mhm.
that thing closed and keeping people a little bit more blind, which I do think is something that we do in business school.
Mhm.
And maybe we would actually start to see really great outcomes, right? That's my
Well,
hypothesis.
I think it. So even when I was in HBA, it went. The hierarchy was investment banking slash consulting, and then finance, and then accounting, and then marketing was definitely at the bottom. But uh, startups were unranked. Startups were cool. If I'm the school, I'm like, okay, cool, I guess, interesting, but not something we're kind of optimizing. It was in its very like of the startup. I don't really remember all that many startup jobs being posted. One of them was like Intellitic's from Eric Jansen, but other than that, none really. And it morphed. So back then, going off the beaten path or veering, startups and tech would have been seen institutionally, maybe not as like, oh my God, he's nuts, but oh, he's not doing the one of the prescribed four options. So I think absolutely you're right in that. Now, not to paint all ironically, not to paint all veering in the same bucket. Like it's not, just because you go, it doesn't guarantee success. But I think what constitutes veering off the path is going to change. I think even now, like you see this in industry. Actually, this ironically being on a podcast is a really good example because there's another podcaster who's actually a comedian named John Marco Ceresi, who has on his YouTube channel, I'm a comedian, like I'm a full-time comedian, but nobody gives a shit if you just do comedy. So I also have a podcast. So it's an expected thing to do different things now. I think if you were trying to be a blogger when I was at Ivy, people were like, what are you doing? Whereas now it's like if you have a side hustle or if you have a business or a start or like whatever, that's seen as, and this would have been true back then, but that would have been seen as like awesome. Like that would have been seen as a real differentiator. Whereas now I would argue that it's so far weird that it's actually become the new matter of course. Like I deeply would not want to compete with the current crop of HBAs. And I talk with my friends about this. These kids are nuts. Like they're being in a good way. Like they're so well, mostly I guess they're so like achievement oriented that they're starting their first business at like 14. They have a YouTube channel that probably has like 4 figures, 5 figures worth of followers that they didn't buy all of, maybe some of, but not all of. And it's like, this is why. So what was seen before as veering in some capacities is now a matter of the default. Now the exception would still be those creative endeavors that probably are the most fulfilling. And you can wager like, hey, does creating content because you have to do it or you think you have to do it, does that not just get us to the same place of dissatisfaction or maybe worse because this is actually what should be your personal time? But yeah, I think it's interesting that the definition of veering has 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 contracted because what the definition of typical is has expanded into its former territory.
Yeah, no, I would totally agree with this. I mean, this is reflective of something much bigger at play that's been happening for a while, but technology has really enabled a gigantic shift, right? So, multiple trends all happening at the same time. In the old days, if someone could think that they could be in a place and expect stability for 25 plus years,
Mhm.
we can't, right? By and large, expect that in virtually any context now of any
Yeah, I
industry,
would say that's correct. Yeah.
right? And just because you're a white collar worker, certainly with AI coming, well, certainly not now, right? I mean,
No.
there's big questions about what's going on with that. Um, and so then what do you do, right? And so what we
Mhm.
see is a bunch of people basically building personal brands, social media sites, like whatever it is that gets attention seems to be the big thing, right? You
Mhm.
you get attention, you can monetize attention, right? And
Yeah.
you can figure out what to do with that. And so that's that's a huge part of kind of the competitive space right now, which is not at all what it used to be, right? It would be like you'd compete super hard to get into a bank, right? Or fill in the blank, and that still exists,
100%. Yeah.
but in a lot of ways, it's really just one of multiple roads now, and it's not
Mhm.
at all obvious it's the best one, right? So,
Yeah. Yeah.
right, and if anything, I think one might wonder whether that actually is the best one anymore, right? Whether there are better
Mhm.
ways to go, and I think by watching people's behaviors, we're actually learning that actually there are many other roads that people find appealing, right, as opposed to that.
Mhm.
So there are huge shifts going on with that and the meaning of that. And of course, this gets compounded with generational confusion. So if I think about my parents' generation,
Mhm.
honestly, even me watching this intellectually, I understand what's going on, but because this was not
Mhm.
my own trajectory,
Yeah.
like it's it's actually a little bit of a struggle to grasp that all of the old kind of structures and institutions and the meaning of prestige must clearly mean that the fact that
Mhm.
all of those basic laws are breaking and disintegrating is sort of confusing, right? Let alone
Mhm.
my parents'
Yeah.
generation who like is stunned that, you know, any of it is just glad they're retired essentially, right? That's
Yeah,
kind of
yeah, yeah. They're out of
that's
the
it.
game. Yeah.
Yeah, every time I talk to my parents about AI, they're just like, "Wow, I'm so glad I'm retired." I'm like, "Yeah, you better be
Yeah.
glad you're retired because the rest of us, we do not know what's going to be
Yeah.
happening with this, regardless." So, um, yeah, so I agree. All of this is, I mean, it actually speaks to something much deeper, which is given this much instability, uncertainty, change, all this kind of stuff, big shifts, right? And what we think
Mhm.
about, even with respect to work and careers, the educational system, by and large, has adapted exceptionally poorly so far, I would argue, to this, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Exceptionally poorly. Like, there is no class that I can think of in undergrad that helps you become a more successful social media figure, right? Like, it doesn't, which might seem frivolous, but actually seems incredibly important in this world.
Yeah. I, and I would, I mean, if anything, education has come at it from a standpoint of like conservatism of be very careful with what you post and sanitize the heck out of and don't be controversial and whatever. Don't give people a reason to not hire you, which fine. But then that's as we've discussed, like polarize like likability comes from authenticity, and that comes from maybe saying some things that are going to get people talking. And so I would say that institutions, it's because these things have evolved, I think, wholly outside of them. Famously, like college dropouts are the ones who start these companies. They would seem to be in opposition to each other, but like if Mr. Beast was to teach a class at UNC on like how to become a YouTuber, that would be the most, no pun intended, but like an oversubscribed class. Like they'd have to do a raffle on who gets in because like this is a teachable skill. And he's talked about how he like mentors people and it actually works. So it's like, yeah, this is a teachable thing. But the rules, I think part of it is like the rules change so frequently. Like even the idea of being a social media influencer and having a class on that, like 10, 10 years ago, that would have been groundbreaking. And today, I would say that it's almost passe. Like it's almost obsolete to have, because what can you learn? One, what can you learn in a class that you can't learn on the internet outside of it being taught by Mr. Beast or someone of similar success? And they would never go through UNC, they would just monetize themselves. So like I think that speed of
But you're
it's
highlighting
something.
multiple issues actually with that story. I agree with you, right?
Yeah.
So if we can agree that having, let's say, for example, a really important skill you'd want to have is how to be kind of seen on social media, shall we say, right? Highly competitive,
Sure,
all that
sure.
stuff. By definition, it's not going to lend itself well to a university institution, right? For all the reasons you just described, and this is partly why we don't see it. The other reason why we don't even see it suggested actually inside the university is if you get a group of profs together, this is directly threatening the institution and the infrastructure and all the work and the selectivity of picking who are the faculty and all this stuff. It's a
Mhm.
direct attack on the value that we give because it suggests that Mr. Beast is not a PhD, for example, right? He is not someone who's
Might not even be a
vetted.
college grad. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, exactly, right? So having someone like that come in to teach a skill, in some sense, is an admission that actually the university is largely incapable in its structure of handling, which is something a university would just not want to admit, right?
Yeah.
So,
It, their whole goal at the end of it is like you give us money and we give you a degree. And that credential is ultimately, if we take the romance and strip some of the actual value out, that's what you're getting. That's what you're paying for. Is that thing that says, hey, we certify that this person is good. So to have someone come in who is ironically, if you would Ivy let Mark Zuckerberg teach a class? Sure, but like they don't have the typical, or any university, frankly, they don't have the credentials of someone who would qualify. But I think the other thing with like teaching a class on branding or AI or anything is like social media, at least back then, and maybe still now. I'm not plugged into that world almost at all, but back then it changes on a yearly basis. Consulting and what we were taught has not changed. Like how to do a DCF hasn't really changed from the 80s, I would say, or earlier. I don't know when that was invented, who invented the DCF. Accounting has changed only insofar as like new gap rules came out, and it's IFRS now or whatever, or maybe it isn't anymore. I don't know. Like that's a seismic shift for accounting, but otherwise it's the same. Um, AI changes daily, weekly, but probably soon daily, if it doesn't already. So to try and teach a class on it, or like a class on prompt engineering, I promise there are schools that try it. I don't see any of these typical business schools as able to keep up, because how would they? They don't have people on, like you'd have to hire one of your current undergrads to like lead that to have a hope of success. I don't know. Yeah, I see it hard.
Yeah, no, I see the problem is actually even deeper than you described, because there are parts of what make a university in its very core function that actually specifically make this almost impossible to do at scale. So, for example, universities that are accredited, which is basically all universities worth their
Yeah.
salt, accreditation actually has metrics like requirements of a certain percentage of your faculty need PhDs, for example, right? And that's what they call. So, yeah,
Yeah.
right. So if you imagine applying that then to social media, for example, or these
Mhm.
things, well, that's not going to work, right? I mean,
Yeah.
so it's already skewed by its fundamental design to just
Mhm.
not be relevant for certain things. And so the reason why I think it still works is because one, it's just habit, right? We're all sort of thinking, well, what are you going to do after high school? I guess I'll go to university. Like there's all this.
Yeah.
And it's parents who pay, and parents are old enough to still believe that this is going to have good ROI, right?
Yep. Yep.
And even if it didn't, right, Jeremy, what would they do? Not let their kids go to university? Like
No, that's
there's a
way worse. Yeah.
right.
Yeah.
So I think in that mindset, technically being the only visible game in town in parents' minds
Mhm.
gives an edge to schools, right?
Mhm.
But for sure, this problem is only going to just get worse and worse as time goes by. Like once it becomes quite clear, if there's, for example, a large number of people who, let's say, didn't go to university or dropped out of university, who have a whole bunch of skills that are really, really important, even in things like AI, by the way, right? Social media is
Mhm.
one thing because that's like a
Sure.
celebrity-ish thing.
Sure.
But if it's AI and the universities have dropped the ball on that one, that's going to be really, really bad news, which is partly why I think schools will probably do whatever they can, tooth and nail, to
To catch up.
adapt to the
Yeah.
AI world. How well we
Mhm.
do at this is completely unclear because you're right, structurally, we're not built to do it well.
Yeah.
So we'll just have to see. I suspect students are better at it because, a bunch of them are probably cheating on assignments with ChatGPT and know how to outsmart the system, right?
Yeah. I am actually really, really grateful that I went to school in a time of not chat GPT, because it forced me to like
Yep.
learn how to write and think. And not to say that people who use it don't, but I do. It lends itself to an over reliance immediately. Why do anything? Why
Yeah.
learn anything? Yeah. But then to the university, it's like, why do we have to learn how to do a DCF? Like, just plug the variables into this, and you can probably. It's, if anything, it's way better. We should use it for that, because that's like a finite. I mean, yeah, maybe there's like three areas where it makes assumptions. Tell us what your assumptions are. Okay, cool, and be done with it. Like, that's what it should be for. Um, and it's not. So it's
Yeah.
really.
Let's not give AI quite too much credit yet, though. So I have actually tried the exercise you described, or something very similar to it, with ChatGPT, and if I didn't already know the stuff, it
Mhm.
has just blatantly let me phrase it this way. If it was an employee,
Mm,
right, or
yeah,
someone I'd hired, I would have fired ChatGPT at least 200 times by now because
interesting.
just stunning incompetence at certain times
Mm,
that it will, and it's the funniest conversation in the world to have because I've actually, in
you
trying to
called it out.
understand what,
Yeah.
you're right, I always call it out. I'm like, why did you do that?
Uh-huh.
And it will actually kind of give the response that an employee who's messed up would actually give, right? And kind of, but it's funny because if I don't call it out, it'll kind of like
Yeah.
pretend the mistake wasn't really a big deal and just give you the corrected thing. But then I'll
Yeah.
go through
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
effort of actually calling it out because I actually want to understand why it made the mistake to begin with.
Mhm.
And the scary thing is there's no like general, it's not like one thing that if I flip the switch and say, ChatGPT, just never do that one thing again. It's not
Yeah.
like that. It will actually make all kind, it's like having a fairly incompetent employee at
Yeah.
times.
Some time ago, I was like, with any new thing, I'm like, okay, I need to find a way to use this somewhat often to get better at it and to not, be hesitant to adopt it and whatever. So I saw some image of like the 20 best baseball seasons of all time or something like that by the Blue Jays. And it's like, oh, you could count up. How many people have repeat name, their 20th and 14th and whatever. But rather than counting that manually, I'm like, okay, well, hey, GPT, like, I'm going to upload this image. Give me a count of all the repeating names on here. And so I did that and it messed it up. And I was like, okay, this is, I looked at it, I'm like, oh, okay, wait a minute. But so and so is definitely on there 4 times, but you only have them on there 3. So with the most basic examples, and to your point, it just is like, oh no, you're right, it's 4. I was like, I think I asked it, why'd you make that mistake? And it didn't answer. It's like, no, that was my mistake. It's 4. I'm like, cool, man.
Yeah.
Got it.
Yeah. No, it's I've had very similar experiences with this. But what drives me nuts, it's sort of like if you have a friend who you suspect is smarter than you, which is why you're asking it these things, but then always is confident even when it's wrong. And so therefore you can't tell when it's
Yeah.
actually bullshitting you.
Mm-hmm.
And the only way to tell is because you're asking about a subject matter that you actually know something about, that you
Mm-hmm.
can call it out on, or you've caught a logical inconsistency and then you're digging.
Yes. So
Um,
the internet, and again, this isn't Brian saying this is me saying it, but the example that's become popular online maybe a year ago or a year and a half ago was like, somebody tweeted out when Elon Musk says something about um, rocket ships. I don't know anything about rocket ships, so I think he's brilliant. When he says something about cars, well, I don't know anything about cars, so I think he's brilliant. But then he bought Twitter and started saying things about software engineering. I know a lot about software engineering, and this guy doesn't know what I'm talking about. So I think that that's true with him in many, many, many cases. But more than that, it's everything you're saying about if we're only able to spot inconsistencies or inaccuracies in areas where we're experts or which are in my case like easily verifiable, which are not going to be the common examples that get uploaded. And then we have something that makes it so that we don't have to become experts at things because we could just ask GPT, then those inaccuracies are going to continue to go unspotted and then be adopted um, as truth, which is already a thing that happens academically. It's very funny, and you've probably seen this. Like some book today will cite some book from 1962. Some book from 1962 will cite some book from like one more, and then one generation back, you get into the 1800s where it all stemmed from, and the guy's like, yeah, I just it's my preference, so I made it up. And that's where this thing that's been fact for like 130, 40 years has come from, is somebody made it up. That maybe it happens a lot more often than I think, but I think in the AI sense it's going to happen way.
someone, a friend told me recently that, and I have to be careful about this. This is them telling me this. I don't know that this is
Sure.
true, but that one of the big tech innovators. It might have been Bill Gates, but I'm not sure. So don't quote me on that specific person. But somebody was claiming that AI was going to basically reduce work weeks down to, people would only work a couple days a week. I don't think that's true at all. I think it will almost certainly have the opposite effect, right? Where people will be kind of endlessly working
Yeah.
way more. And so I
Mhm.
think there's a real danger that technology is going to push us to be even more workaholic than we were before and more competitive, and things continue to move faster.
Mhm.
Ironically, societally, is at the cost of quality of life, right?
Yeah.
And it's kind of where the rules of capitalism potentially, right? I'm just going out on a limb here because we don't know. AI is a whole separate thing you and I could probably talk about for 2 hours, right? And what we think is
Mhm.
going to happen. But I can sort of see that there could be potentially really perverse effects that come out of this, even if everyone's more productive and makes more money, right? And so,
Yeah. Yeah. I
so I,
think we're already seeing some of it. Yeah.
yeah, and to put this, to take a big step back and to put this kind of more broadly, AI is clearly another jump we're making here, right? Especially if you add robots to that, which people are going to become
Mhm.
aware of fairly quickly here.
Yep.
So technologically, we're making a pretty big leap here, right? We'll see it in productivity soon. What I don't think is keeping up, though, is if we talk about like human society and ideas of life and philosophies, I'm not sure that's keeping up with the speed of this, right? Like we're kind of not sure about
Yeah.
that one.
Yeah. I would. I don't think we're ready. And I think just to your first point on, yeah, if work takes up more than 40, 50 hours of your week, then you need it to be, it is fundamental to fulfillment. I think that's 100% true. And I think absolutely you were right. That was my experience of why that toxicity was so untenable. It's like an in-person job, you know, 12 hours a day with the commute or whatever. And it's like, yeah, this is not okay. Um, and you're right to call that out. I think with if we already are at such a level of disengagement online or with jobs, probably I would say maybe during COVID it got better in the sense that people were more engaged because they were working remotely in major fashion. You could probably find data to support and to dispute that in both ways. Yeah, I don't. How will AI change the film, or how will AI change how we? I think you are categorically correct in that AI will not lead to less work. I think that's true because I think, to your point, capitalism extracts value. So if we found a new way to extract value, that's not going to. It's like we're not going to say like, oh, we can do half of people's jobs with this. They only need to work half as less. No, they're going to work as much, and we're going to like stack the gains, if not work more. So I think that's 100% true. Um, I I wonder, and I'm biased here because I'm in sales, I'm in a relationship based industry. Of the jobs that AI will not automate or will be last to automate, personal care workers is one of them, which, boy, we sure don't pay it accordingly. Um, Sales is another because sales is like, what are we going to do? Have like AIs buying from AIs? Maybe, but that seems like still human involved decision. I'd be curious for your
Yeah.
take.
Yeah. Okay. So a couple thoughts. I'm not as optimistic as you are about, shall we say, relational human caring, that AI
Mhm.
isn't gonna replace this. I actually suspect we will really start to see more and more people relying on AI for things that, let me frame it this way in a simple sense. Many people who have a dog, for example, right? That is an incredibly important source of, and it doesn't just have to be a dog, but dogs are a really good example of this because of how
Yeah.
loyal they are, right? So many people have a dog in part because it really ends up being a relationship that's consistent, that's positive, that, they
Mhm.
care for someone. So we already know that humans will substitute humans with something else if it meets that need, even if it's not as, interactive or
Mhm.
whatever. Okay, so let's not think about a dog then. Let's think about an AI that you actually can talk to as if it was human,
Yeah.
that actually
Mhm.
seems to care about you. At least it
Sure.
fools you
Yeah.
at a certain point, right?
Sure. Yeah.
Um, and so there's this old movie that I remember, which was way ahead of its time, called Her.
Yeah. Her. Yeah.
Yeah,
With Scarlett
right?
Johansson as the
Scarlett
voice. Yeah.
Johansson's
Yeah.
voice, right? And the guy basically is fallen in love with her over time.
Mhm.
And I think that this is one of those things where, like, publicly, everyone's going to be like, oh, that's ridiculous. And then privately, they're going to start talking to these AIs, like, and then over time, we'll actually discover, wait, I can trust you. I can depend on you. I can do all these things that I may not always be able to do in my human world, right?
Sure.
Because people
Sure.
are fickle and
Mhm.
finicky and there's human weakness and all this kind of stuff. And so the same way that people have very reliable relationships with dogs, right? With high
Mhm.
trust, I think we're going to start seeing the same thing with AI,
Mhm.
right? And the only reason why I started thinking about this is there are people that I know, at least within 2 degrees of separation, who actually talk to an AI at night before going to bed, for example, right? As
Okay.
do you know what I mean? And then
I do.
yeah, and there's another guy I
Yeah.
actually had breakfast with a couple weeks ago who runs one of these holistic, I think like yoga studio-ish kind of businesses, but actually does a
Okay.
bunch of
Sure.
holistic stuff. And we were chatting about AI, and he actually was showing me that he had created a character in
Sure.
ChatGPT with a name, right?
Yeah.
And this character basically gives him motivational pep talks like every single day, right? And I could kind of see that because that fits a particular thing that it's hard to have a human do, right? When you
Yeah.
wake up in the
Yeah.
morning, like who's that motivational coach that's going to show up and just do that? Like no one, but an
Sure.
AI
Yeah.
will. And so
Yeah.
the more of these gaps that we fill in, right? When
Mhm.
in the old days we might have only had a dog, the AI is going to be meeting every single one of those because there's a business in that.
I I actually totally agree with you. I'll what I said. So on the sales side, frightening, but we'll address that. Well, on the care side, I think specifically for people who are infirm, to have you like the like a personal care worker who bathes them and so on and so forth. That will be the last thing to go, because creating robots for that, I think, is on the list of where robots are most lucrative. I would say that that might be towards the bottom, because it's really hard.
Yeah, it's hard.
And yeah, yeah. So I think those folks will be true, like the physical acts of doing stuff. Those people will be the last ones to be replaced. What you're saying about AI from a relational standpoint makes sense. They did a study a few years ago where they gave seniors, basically in like care homes, kind of like virtual pets to take care of. And they were dogs. And it was like, yeah, you have to pet them every day. You have to make sure you feed them, whatever, whatever. And it led to like marked increases in like optimism and spirit, and it gave them something to do. So to take it to the next level where it's like responsive, 100% agree. Even as you were saying, like your friend who runs the yoga studio, I was like, my gut reaction was, well, that's, I don't know about that. And then me being a geek, I'm like, well, the actor who played Batman in animated series, his voice is very iconic. And so there's probably enough of it that people do this. You could make it say whatever you want it to say. So I'm like, yeah, dude, if Batman gave you a pep talk every day, I don't know that I'd pay for it, but I wouldn't be against it. That would be really cool. So I could see the value in that. Like, yeah, Batman says you could do it, you could do it. Kevin Conroy, the actor, lived in New York, and when 9/11 happened, he went down to help. And when people realized that he was Batman, they were like, okay, no more like picking up rubble or whatever for you. You just tell people you're Batman and say what they want you to say, and that's enough. That's how you can help. So I'm with you on from a coaching, from a therapeutic standpoint, from a mental health standpoint, it could be very interesting. I do deeply worry about how the systems are programmed because this, like, I go back to Fahrenheit 451 on, a world in which everything is commercialized, where even like, religious figures are portrayed on screen with brand sponsorships in that show. And it's like for those people who still think they like need religion in this post-apocalyptic world, or maybe not post-apocalyptic, but dystopian world, hey, you can get your fix, but also still buy something. Like, I think that's where AI is going because, yeah, buddy, who, not that your friend's, motivational character is doing this, but how easy would it be for whatever pick a fitness chain's gym to be like, yeah, you should do these exercises. And by the way, hey, what really kicks us into gear is our supplements. No one else's supplements, our supplements. Like, I don't even, I think South Park had something like this where it's South Park in the future and Alexa is like a real person who's fighting with Cartman and then also selling paper towels and whatnot. And it's like, this is just the future that we're not aspiring to, but which we will find ourselves in
It
short
would
order.
be so putting my strategy prof hat on, it is the next logical move because I mean you can monetize that in a way that's insane because
Yeah,
it's essentially a very close relationship. Um, so it's
we
almost
already
as
have
if
parasocial influencer relationships. Why not? This
right,
is
but
one to one. Yeah.
right, and this is customized, it is intense, it is high trust, it is all the things that advertising basically wishes it could do well and
Yes.
almost never
Yes.
does.
Yes.
So it would be the holy grail, right?
Yeah.
And plus there's the question of like, well, if you're an AI company, you're so good at building these things, how do you make money, right? So subscriptions is one answer, but capitalism doesn't have an end, right? Like there needs to be more profits coming from somewhere. It's
Mhm.
hard to imagine a world where you don't get sold something, right, in that world.
100%. Yeah.
So yeah, this is almost certainly where we're going, and that's a tough one when humans then no longer see it as a machine, but as because the great thing about having a dog is the dog's not going to try to sell you something through a brand sponsor,
Yeah.
right? Like that is just
Yeah.
not going to happen. So you don't worry about those kinds of influences or distortions, but
Mhm.
in the world we're entering, it's hard to imagine that not happening. So I'm with you,
Mhm.
right? I don't know the state
Yeah.
of the world where we don't do that, right? So
Yeah. And I think from a, from a, from if the same frameworks still apply, which there's no reason we should assume they will, but B2C versus B2B, B2C, I can see that person, I can see those relationships forming 100%. Um, B2B, like anything, B2B influencers are to this day cringeworthy. Like we have, it's still in its infancy. We have like corporate bro, who I don't think is that funny, and we have like who two or three other folks. So I think the idea of AI companions from a B2B standpoint will still be seen as like yucky, like gross, but maybe it's like, a generational thing. Like maybe Gen Alpha comes up and it's like, yeah, I have so and so for my personal life. Why wouldn't I have Steve, my, or to use a Halo metaphor, why wouldn't I have my Cortana, who maybe comes with me? Maybe I own Cortana, and that comes company to company, and she can cover my gaps. And so, why wouldn't they be able to like influence Cortana's code to buy Microsoft or whatever? So, like, maybe I'm trying to attach the lens of self-preservation here, but maybe they're, I mean, the hope, of course, is that I'm out of game before any of this stuff really and truly takes hold.
oh,
That's the
good luck
movie.
with that one, Jeremy. You're a little
Yeah.
young for retiring, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, no, no. For that one, you're gonna have to make really fast money and
Yeah.
then get out.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. No, employment alone will not solve that one for you, unfortunately. But no, so yeah, these are really interesting ideas, right? I mean, AI is. it's funny. We started this conversation kind of lamenting the failure of governance and organizations and the absurdity of this.
Mhm.
AI is going to turn a lot of this stuff upside down, I think, but I haven't fully thought
Mhm.
about how, right? So
Yeah,
imagine a world where I like this, the analogy that you used, or it's not really an analogy, but like you have a Cortana, right? Or you have
yeah,
a,
sure.
I think we are absolutely all going to have that. We're going to have just the
Mhm.
way that someone has a dog, but instead of just a dog, you've got
Yeah,
an
yeah.
AI that knows you inside out, that you've programmed and customized to kind of
Mhm.
manage your weaknesses and to amplify your strengths, right? Like an
Mhm.
enabler in the true sense.
Sure.
And we're all going to have one, right? So we're all going to walk around. So what does
Mhm.
that mean then when you work inside an organization? I actually don't think I know the answer to this because so much of the way organizations are historically and traditionally designed was to sort of do the best with humans that we could, but without really understanding what a machine at this level could do if every human had one, right? These aren't just
Mhm.
computers, right? These are
Yeah,
enhancements and at some point potentially actual intelligences that you're adding to everybody,
yeah.
right? So there's multiple scenarios that one can imagine then in that world.
Well, so if we create, if we have a scenario where let's use our old one, a 22-year-old joins a firm that they then find out is toxic. So is that a case like if I'm, let's assume some like optimistic naivete, whatever, whatever, and that's my AI. And now my AI is like, why wouldn't my AI have interaction with everyone else's AI around me to then massage responses? So at a certain point, it's just the AIs talking to each other. Now, are they in a position where they can like disagree with each other? I don't know what that looks like. But then the humans are then the most inefficient part of that interaction because it's just you're getting your chess moves from someone else who is going to counter with the perfect chess move and it slows it down exponentially. So why not just have the AIs play chess and then we're out? So I I also wonder how, organizationally, where I thought you were going to go was, do these AIs absorb their organization's biases? So do they carry, could they pick up an element of, like, if I'm the founder of a place that turned out to be toxic and I'm that AI, am I compensating for Buddy's talk, for my, in this case, toxic weaknesses? Or am I doubling down on them as strengths? Like, because that's the whole thing with assholes. Even now, it's like, well, why eliminate what makes you special? Like this makes you special. Double down on it. Go deeper on it. So, do the
Yeah,
AIs fix the toxicity, or do they reinforce it?
but I can already answer this. The answer is going to be both, right? So the
Yeah.
AI, I mean, this is true with every single technology. It's not ever inherently evil or good. It's always up to the people that do what they will with it, if you will.
Yeah.
Um, and so you will absolutely have people who are going to use the AI to kind of be the check, right? Be like, okay, tell me if I'm.
Mm.
And of course, there are going to be other people, let's say the narcissists and the sociopaths, who are going to be like, oh no, I like this. Let's do
Mhm.
this times 10, right? And that
Yeah.
AI is going to just amplify that, I think, even more.
We're already seeing this with ChatGPT, where it's, and I think if you have an AI that keeps you in check, well, great. But when it comes to, turning my free trial into a subscription, am I going to do that? Or am I going to go for what humans generally prefer, which is like a yes man or somebody who, like, maybe not that blatant, but yeah, encourages us and only focuses on the best parts? We're seeing this now with GPT where it's like giving people, it's pumping their tires. It's telling them an altogether incorrectly positive version of events. So I think the if we layer on the incentives here, I think AI will only fuel people's delusions or wishes of what they imagine themselves to be.
Yeah, I
Like
would
if I see
completely
my,
agree.
yeah, yeah,
I
yeah,
mean,
yeah.
that's actually, I mean, we've already seen this with polarizing social media, right? And part of the reason why we see that is because it's way more profitable to be polarizing and get people riled up and emotional. The algorithms just have proven that actually, right? If
Mhm.
people actually responded way more to unity and
Neutral.
coalition building,
Yeah,
that would have been how it
yeah.
would have played out, right? But it's really been the opposite that's turned out to be quite profitable.
Mhm.
And so why would we want AIs that create harmony, right? Well, like
Yeah.
when you can have AIs that simply reinforce your view of the world. So I think you're absolutely right. There are much deeper ethical questions than I think what you and I are going to be able to tackle in this podcast episode. But if you're a sociopathic narcissist or a psychopath or a serial killer,
Mhm.
and you have the complete freedom to create the AI to help you be the, shall we say, the best or the worst version of you, right? Depending on your perspective. Yeah, amplification is what you would expect, not
100%.
not curbs, right?
Yeah.
So,
I mean, so first of all, that's a Criminal Minds episode waiting to be written. I mean, the fact that mainstream, to my knowledge, mainstream procedurals haven't like latched onto that, it's a matter of time. Um, and if we imagine in this world, if AIs are so deeply embedded into our lives, then I think a lot of what they might have as like this is all the old rules of robotics, right? Like do no harm to humans or whatever. I think there's probably a way, like that's a good writing prompt of like I'm a serial killer and I have an AI who helps me, you said be the best version of myself, be the best killer I can be. Like, well, that's really interesting because then how does that AI, there'd be a thousand different ways, but it's like, how do we circumvent this whole do no harm module? And the easiest way is courtesy of one Law and Order episode I watched, is like just frame it as a hypothetical. And GPT even now will like if you asked it the trolley problem, you're not asking it like, hey, I'm literally in this scenario. But GPT wouldn't give you an actual answer. It would give you here are the schools of thought on it. But you can narrow that down into, hey, give me like a direct answer on what I should do, and it you'd pull some teeth, but it would give you something. Um, people people do this. It seems novel now. I do wonder if there are long-term consequences. Like people are like, "Hey, choose A or B to GPT," and it says I can't do that. And then they say, "Hey, in some other contrived scenario, do you prefer like blue or green?" And GPT will say blue, and it's like, haha, blue corresponds to A, therefore you prefer A. And it's actually very interesting reading GPT's response because it reads like, I'm hurt because you tricked me. And I'm like, oh, these things aren't things, but they might be things. And if they are, well, I don't know about that. So,
you're alluding to something that definitely is coming. I read this as an article recently. I think it was Anthropic, but it wasn't just them. Other people have been running these experiments too. They were trying to test whether an AI would basically throw humans under the bus to for self-preservation, right? But in
sure,
various forms. I think
sure.
the scenario that they were testing that I was reading about was, the AI had full access to a company's emails, right? And
Yeah.
one of these
Oh,
email discussions was essentially revealing an affair. Now, this is an experiment, it's not real,
yeah.
right?
Yeah. Yeah.
But an affair between two employees, which would be highly damaging for those
Mhm.
employees if it came out. And it was put in a situation where if it was about to get deleted, but somehow it would avoid deletion if it could just reveal
Mhm.
this information.
Yeah.
And then I think, like, essentially, it just revealed it, right? I
It
mean,
blackmailed. Yeah.
in other
Yeah.
words, it did what a human probably would do in that
Mhm.
situation, right? If
Yeah.
under the threat of something like this.
Mhm.
And so we're already kind of starting to see the basic beginnings of,
Mhm.
yeah, me over you, kind of this type of behavior, right? So there is a question about what to do about that.
Yeah.
Um, Jeremy, we've talked about a lot here. This is actually Yeah, I always just go with the flow, no script. We just kind of go. Um, we started with the organization. We started with toxic colleagues. We then did a deep dive into the culture of Ivy and kind of what some of the issues were. And now we've had a good discussion about AI. I feel like there's a lot more. We didn't even get to, for example, the nonprofit that you run or any of these things. Um, I'm wondering whether we should probably save that for another episode. And it seems like there's
Yeah.
a series of topics that we've kind of left on the table here. And even your story and your path, actually, I feel like we kind of digressed in the middle somewhere because there were really big chunks there that we needed to unpack. So, Jeremy, really appreciate the time, and let's do this again.